What would you do if no one was watching? At 4:47 a.m., in an empty parking lot where shadows swallow secrets, Evan Cole made a choice that would shatter everything he thought he knew about survival. One scratch, one note, one decision that should have cost him nothing, but instead it pulled him into a game he didn't know he was playing, a game designed by someone who'd been watching all along. This is his story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story reaches. Now, let's begin. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store parking lot buzzed like dying insects, casting sickly yellow pools across cracked asphalt. Evan Cole sat behind the wheel of his 15-year-old Honda Civic, engine ticking as it cooled, and watched the dashboard clock roll over to 4:47 a.m. His third shift had ended 20 minutes ago. His fourth would begin in 5 hours. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his palms, feeling the grit of exhaustion settle deeper into his bones. 36 years old, and he felt ancient. The parking lot was nearly deserted. A single shopping cart lay overturned near the entrance, abandoned. Sodium vapor lamps hummed overhead, their orange glow struggling against the pre-dawn darkness. In the distance, the city skyline glittered with the promises of a world that had long since stopped including him. Evan reached for his phone, checking the time again as if it might have changed in the last 30 seconds. He had exactly $19 in his checking account. Payday wasn't for another 3 days. His son, Marcus, 8 years old, gap-toothed, still believing his father was some kind of hero, needed new shoes. The ones he wore to school had holes in the soles that Evan had tried to patch with cardboard. The thought made something twist in his chest. He put the car in reverse, hand resting on the gear shift when he heard it. Scrape. The sound was soft but unmistakable. Metal on metal, a fingernail across a chalkboard. Evan's foot slammed on the brake. His heart lurched. No, 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 no. He threw the car into park and climbed out, his breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air. The parking lot was empty except for his Civic and one other vehicle parked 3 spaces away. A sleek midnight blue Tesla Model S that looked like it had been sculpted from liquid mercury. Even in the dim light, it gleamed. And there, along the passenger side door, was a fresh white scratch running from the door handle to the rear quarter panel. Maybe 18 inches long, maybe $1,000 to fix, maybe more. Evan's legs went weak. He looked around frantically. The parking lot was a tomb. No cameras visible on the light poles, no security guard. No witnesses. The grocery store windows were dark except for the perpetual glow of the checkout lanes. The street beyond was silent. He could leave. The thought arrived fully formed, seductive in its simplicity. He could get back in his car, drive away, and no one would ever know. The scratch could have happened anywhere. The owner would never trace it to him. Evan would go home, shower, sleep for 3 hours, then wake up to make Marcus breakfast before school. Life would continue in its familiar pattern of quiet desperation. His hand was already reaching for his car door when he stopped. Marcus. The image arrived unbidden, his son's face, serious and open, asking one of those questions that 8-year-olds ask with devastating innocence. "Dad, what do you do when you make a mistake?" Evan had answered without thinking. "You own it, buddy, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "Damn it," Evan whispered to the empty air. He stood there for a long moment, the cold seeping through his thin jacket. Then he walked back to his car, popped open the glove compartment, and pulled out a crumpled receipt and a pen that barely worked. He smoothed the paper against the hood of his Civic and began to write. "I'm sorry. I accidentally scratched your car while backing out. I don't have much, but I want to make this right." He paused, the pen hovering, then added his phone number. Evan Cole. His hand shook slightly as he folded the paper and wedged it under the Tesla's windshield wiper. The car was beautiful up close, the kind of machine he used to dream about when he was still an engineer, before the layoffs, before Sarah died, before the world revealed itself to be far less interested in fairness than he'd been raised to believe. He stepped back, staring at the note fluttering gently in the breeze. "Stupid," he muttered. "So stupid." But he didn't take it back. Evan climbed into his Civic, started the engine, and drove out of the parking lot without looking back. He didn't see the black sedan parked across the street, engine off, windows tinted. Didn't notice the interior light that clicked on briefly as someone inside lifted a phone and made a call. Didn't know that in a corner office 17 miles away, a woman named Madeline Cross was already awake, standing before floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a city just beginning to stir. She held a phone to her ear, listening. "Confirmed," the voice on the other end said. He left a note, full contact information. Madeline said nothing for a moment. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. Not quite dawn, but the promise of it. She could see the first stirrings of traffic on the streets below, all those lives beginning their daily routines, unaware of how fragile their trajectories really were. "Interesting," she said finally. "Run the full background. I want to know everything by noon." She ended the call and set the phone down on her desk, a massive slab of reclaimed wood that had once been part of a ship. The office around her was minimalist to the point of severity. No photographs, no personal effects, nothing that suggested a life beyond work. Just clean lines, expensive materials, and the soft hum of climate control. Madeline was 43, tall and angular, with iron gray hair she wore pulled back in a way that suggested she'd never had time for vanity. She'd built Cross Technologies from nothing, a logistics and supply chain empire that moved goods across 6 continents, employed 12,000 people, and generated annual revenue in the billions. Forbes called her a visionary. The Wall Street Journal called her ruthless. She considered both assessments incomplete. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't, was that she wasn't interested in money anymore. She had more than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. She wasn't interested in power, not the kind they wrote about. She was interested in something much harder to find. Integrity, real integrity. The kind that couldn't be faked or bought or performed for an audience. The kind that existed in the dark, when no one was watching, when there was every reason to choose the easy path and no reason except character to choose otherwise. She'd been looking for it for 7 years, testing for it, hunting for it, and every single time she'd been disappointed. Until now. Maybe.
Was?
By the time Evan pulled into the driveway of his rental house, a small, sagging structure in a neighborhood that real estate agents delicately called transitional, the sun was beginning to rise. Golden light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the patchy lawn he kept meaning to mow. He sat in the car for a moment, letting the engine tick itself quiet, and tried to calculate exactly how much he'd just cost himself. The scratch couldn't have been cheap to repair. Best case scenario, $500. Worst case, he didn't want to think about worst case. He made $11.50 an hour at the warehouse, $13.20 at the grocery store, and $15 doing weekend maintenance for a property management company. None of those jobs offered health insurance. All of them together barely covered rent, utilities, and groceries. There was nothing extra. There was never anything extra. Evan let his head fall back against the headrest, closing his eyes. For just a moment, he let himself imagine a different life. One where he could afford to scratch a Tesla and not spend the next week calculating whether he'd have to skip meals to pay for it. One where Marcus could have new shoes without Evan having to choose between that and keeping the electricity on. The front door opened and Mrs. Chen from next door stepped out onto her porch. She was 70-something, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, and she watched Marcus every morning before school for $20 a week, a rate Evan knew was absurdly low but couldn't afford to question. She waved. He waved back and climbed out of the car. "Long night?" she called. "Aren't they all?" Evan replied, managing a tired smile. "That boy of yours was asking about you yesterday. Wanted to know why you work so much." Evan's smile faltered. "What'd you tell him?" "That you're doing your best. That's all any of us can do." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and headed inside. The house was quiet. Evan moved through it carefully, avoiding the floorboards that creaked. In the small living room, Marcus was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, his homework scattered on the coffee table. He'd waited up again, despite Evan's repeated instructions to go to bed. Evan knelt beside the couch, studying his son's face. Marcus looked so much like Sarah it sometimes hurt to look at him. Same dark curls, same scattering of freckles across the bridge of his nose, same slightly stubborn set to his jaw even in sleep. "Hey, buddy," Evan whispered, gently shaking his shoulder. Time to wake up. Marcus stirred, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment he looked confused. Then he saw his father and smiled. Dad, you're home. I'm home. Come on, let's get you to bed for real. Did you have a good night? Evan thought about the scratch, the note, the choice he'd made that might cost them more than they could afford. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, I did. Marcus yawned and let himself be guided down the hallway to his bedroom, barely large enough for a twin bed and a small dresser, but Marcus had decorated it with drawings and school projects that covered nearly every inch of wall space. Evan tucked him in, pulling the blanket up to his chin. Dad? Marcus's voice was sleepy, already fading. When I grow up, I want to be like you. Something broke inside Evan's chest. He leaned down and kissed his son's forehead. You're going to be better, he whispered. So much better. Marcus was already asleep. Evan managed 3 hours of rest before his alarm went off. He showered in water that never quite got hot, dressed in clothes he'd washed in the sink the night before, and made breakfast. Oatmeal with brown sugar, toast with the last of the peanut butter. Marcus ate while finishing his homework, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration as he worked through a math problem. You stuck? Evan asked, pouring himself coffee that was more water than grounds. Kind of. It's fractions. Evan sat down beside him. For a few minutes, the world contracted to just this, helping his son with homework, listening to him explain his thinking, watching him work through the problem until his face lit up with understanding. I got it. I knew you would. The moment was perfect and fragile, and Evan held on to it as tightly as he could, because he knew how rare these moments were becoming, how much of Marcus's life he was missing, working 3 jobs just to keep them afloat. His phone buzzed. Evan glanced at it, expecting a notification about his shift. Instead, he saw an unfamiliar number. His stomach dropped. 1 second, buddy, he said, standing up and walking into the kitchen. He stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. Hello? Is this Evan Cole? The voice was female, crisp, and professional. Yes. Mr. Cole, my name is Madeline Cross. I believe you left me a note this morning. Evan's mouth went dry. Yes, I'm so sorry about your car. I want to pay for the damage. I just need a little time to... I'm not calling about payment, Mr. Cole. I'm calling to offer you a meeting. Silence. A meeting? Evan repeated slowly. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. My office is downtown, Cross Technologies building. I'd like to discuss something with you. I don't understand. What is there to discuss? I damaged your car. I'll pay for it. Mr. Cole. Her voice was patient but firm. I'm not interested in discussing the car. I'm interested in discussing you. Will you be available tomorrow at 10? Evan's mind raced. This had to be some kind of trap. Rich people didn't just invite strangers to meetings because they left apologetic notes. They sued. They called the police. They made your life exponentially worse. But there was something in her voice, a certainty, a command, that made him believe she wasn't lying. I have work, he said lamely. Can you get the time off? Could he? It would mean losing half a day's pay at the warehouse. It would mean scrambling to make up the hours. It would mean... Yes, he heard himself say. I can be there. Excellent. Ask for me at reception. They'll be expecting you. She hung up before he could respond. Evan stood in his kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, trying to understand what had just happened. Through the doorway, he could see Marcus hunched over his homework, completely absorbed. I'm interested in discussing you. What did that mean? He didn't know, but standing there in the weak morning light, surrounded by all the evidence of his failures, the cracked linoleum, the secondhand furniture, the bills stacked on the counter that he couldn't quite pay, Evan felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope, dangerous, fragile, probably foolish, but hope nonetheless. The Cross Technologies building occupied an entire city block downtown, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky itself. Evan stood across the street, staring up at it, and felt profoundly out of place. He'd worn his only good shirt, the one he saved for job interviews that never led anywhere, and a pair of slacks he'd bought at Goodwill 3 years ago. He'd polished his shoes until they almost looked new. He'd shaved carefully, combed his hair, done everything he could to look like someone who belonged in a place like this. It wasn't enough. The lobby was cathedral-like. Soaring ceilings, marble floors so polished they reflected like mirrors, a massive desk where two receptionists sat beneath a backlit Cross Technologies logo. Everything was clean, expensive, and quietly intimidating. Evan approached the desk, his shoes clicking too loudly. "Hi, I have an appointment with Ms. Cross. My name is Evan Cole." The receptionist, a young woman with perfect hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, typed something into her computer. Her eyebrows rose fractionally. "10th floor, the elevator to your right. Someone will meet you." "Thank you." The elevator was glass on one side, and as it rose, Evan watched the city spread out below him. He'd lived here his entire life, but he'd never seen it from this angle. Up here, it looked different, cleaner, more orderly, like a place where problems could be solved with the right combination of money and willpower. The doors opened on the 10th floor to reveal another reception area, smaller but no less impressive. A woman in her 50s, dressed in a charcoal suit, stood waiting. "Mr. Cole, I'm Patricia, Miss Cross's executive assistant. Follow me, please." They walked down a hallway lined with photographs, warehouses, shipping containers, logistics centers around the world. Patricia moved with brisk efficiency, her heels clicking against polished concrete. "Ms. Cross has cleared her morning for you," Patricia said without looking back. "She asks that you be completely honest with her. She values directness." "Okay," Evan managed. They reached a door of frosted glass. Patricia knocked once, then opened it. The office beyond was enormous. That was Evan's first impression, the sheer scale of it. Floor-to-ceiling windows on two walls, offering a panoramic view of the city. The desk, the chairs, the bookshelf filled with precisely arranged volumes. Everything spoke of wealth so casual it didn't need to announce itself. And behind the desk, rising to her feet, was Madeline Cross. She was taller than he'd expected, with gray hair and sharp features that suggested she'd never smiled unnecessarily in her life. But her eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, were alive with an intelligence that made Evan feel like he was being X-rayed. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming." She extended her hand. Evan shook it, her grip firm and brief. "Please, sit." He sat in one of the chairs facing her desk, his hands folded in his lap to keep them from shaking. Madeline settled back into her own chair, regarding him with that unsettling intensity. "I've done some research on you," she said without preamble. "MIT graduate, mechanical engineering, top 5% of your class. 3 years at Meridian Aerospace before the layoffs in 2019. Your wife passed away 2 years ago, cancer. You have a son, Marcus, age 8. Since Meridian, you've worked..." She glanced at a folder on her desk, though Evan suspected she'd already memorized its contents. 6 different jobs. Currently 3 simultaneously. Warehouse work, grocery store, property maintenance. You're making approximately $31,000 a year before taxes. Your rent is $800 a month. You have $16,000 in medical debt from your wife's treatment. No savings, no assets beyond a 2010 Honda Civic. She looked up. "Is that accurate?" Evan felt stripped naked. "Yes." "Why did you leave the note on my car, Mr. Cole?" The question caught him off guard. Because it was the right thing to do." "Was it? You don't have the money to pay for that repair. You must have known that leaving the note would likely cost you money you can't afford to lose. So why do it?" Evan met her gaze, something stubborn rising in him despite his nervousness. "Because my son was going to ask me what I did," he said quietly, "and I wanted to be able to look him in the eye when I answered." Silence. Madeline leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "I'm going to make you an offer, Mr. Cole. I want you to listen carefully before you respond." "Okay." "I need someone I can trust. That's become difficult to find. Most people can fake integrity when they know they're being watched. But you made a choice in an empty parking lot at 5 in the morning when you had every rational reason to walk away. That interests me." She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. I'm offering you a position with Cross Technologies, operations supervisor at our main distribution center. Starting salary is $65,000, with benefits and a performance bonus structure that could take you to 85 in your first year. You'll be responsible for overseeing logistics, managing a team of 40, and ensuring our operations meet the standards I've set. Evan stared at her, certain he'd misheard. What? There are conditions, Madeline continued, as if he hadn't spoken. This is a probationary position, 6 months. During that time, you'll be evaluated constantly, by me, by others, in ways you won't always see. If you pass, the position becomes permanent and we discuss advancement. If you fail, her expression hardened. If you fail, you're terminated. And the repair bill for my car, which is $3,000, comes due immediately. The number hit Evan like a physical blow. $3,000. Yes. I had it assessed this morning. She folded her hands on the desk. So you need to understand what you're accepting. This isn't charity. This is a test, a demanding, possibly brutal test. You'll be thrown into situations you're not prepared for. You'll face opposition from people who've been with the company for years. You'll be pushed to your absolute limit. She leaned forward slightly. But if you succeed, if you prove to me that what I saw in that parking lot wasn't a fluke, then you'll have changed your life, your son's life, permanently. Evan couldn't breathe. His mind was spinning, trying to process what she was saying, what she was offering, what she was asking. Why? He finally asked. Why me? You don't know me. I know enough. I know you made the hard choice when no one was watching. That's rarer than you think. She paused. I've been looking for someone like you for a very long time, Mr. Cole. I'm willing to bet 3 months of your life and $3,000 of my money that I've found him. And if you're wrong, then we both lose something. Her smile was thin, almost predatory. But I'm rarely wrong. Evan sat there, his heart pounding. Every instinct he had was screaming that this was too good to be true, that people like Madeline Cross didn't hand out life-changing opportunities to strangers, that there had to be a catch. But he thought about Marcus, about new shoes, about not having to work 3 jobs, about maybe, just maybe, being able to breathe again. When would I start? He heard himself ask. Monday. 3 days. 3 days to quit his 3 jobs, to explain to Marcus why everything was about to change, to prepare himself for whatever test Madeline Cross had designed for him. 3 days to make the second hardest choice of his life. But really, there was no choice at all. There had never been any choice. I accept, Evan said. Madeline nodded slowly, as if she'd expected nothing less. Good. Patricia will handle the paperwork. You'll receive an employee handbook and a schedule. Read both carefully. The work begins Monday at 6 a.m. Don't be late. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Evan rose as well, still feeling like he was moving through a dream. Mr. Cole, Madeline said as he reached the door. One more thing. He turned. Her pale eyes pinned him in place. I meant what I said about being tested. This position will demand everything you have. There will be moments when you'll want to quit, when you'll think I've made a mistake, when you'll wonder if surviving on $31,000 a year was actually easier than what I'm going to ask of you. She paused. But if you remember why you left that note, if you hold on to that, you'll be fine. Because I'm not testing your skills, Mr. Cole. I'm testing your character, and so far you're the only person who's passed. Evan swallowed hard. I won't let you down. We'll see. The weekend passed in a blur. Evan quit all 3 jobs, burning bridges he couldn't afford to burn, but had no choice. His manager at the warehouse called him an idiot for walking away from steady work for some maybe downtown. The property management company refused to pay him his last week's wages. The grocery store wished him well and said they'd take him back when, not if when, things didn't work out. He ignored all of it. Saturday night, after Marcus was asleep, Evan sat at his kitchen table with the employee handbook Madeline's office had sent over. It was 200 pages long, dense with policies and procedures, organizational charts, and safety protocols. He read every word. The distribution center was massive, nearly 1 million square feet, handling goods from 40 different suppliers, shipping to 600 retail locations across 3 states, operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 700 employees across 3 shifts, and Evan would be supervising a team of 40 on the day shift, responsible for ensuring smooth operations, managing personnel issues, and reporting directly to the center director. He had no management experience, no logistics background beyond his engineering degree. No reason to think he could handle this, except that Madeline Cross seemed to think he could. Sunday afternoon, he took Marcus to the park. They threw a football back and forth, and Marcus chattered happily about school, about his friend Jackson, about the science project he was planning. Evan listened, really listened, and tried to memorize this moment. "Dad?" Marcus asked, catching the ball against his chest. "Are you nervous about your new job?" "Yeah, buddy, I am. You'll be great. You're the smartest person I know." Evan felt his throat tighten. "Thanks, Marcus." "Will you have to work as much?" "I don't know yet. Maybe less. I hope so." Marcus grinned. "That would be cool. We could do this more often." "Yeah," Evan said softly. "We could." That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, Evan replayed Madeline's words over and over. "I'm testing your character." He thought about the note on the windshield, about the choice he'd made in the dark. He thought about what she'd said, that most people could fake integrity when they knew they were being watched. But how do you fake it when you don't know you're being tested? The question followed him into sleep, and when his alarm went off at 4:30 Monday morning, it was the first thought in his head. The Cross Technologies distribution center squatted on the eastern edge of the city like a sleeping giant, all corrugated metal and loading docks and parking lots that seemed to stretch forever. Evan pulled into the employee lot at 5:40, giving himself 20 minutes to find where he was supposed to be. The main entrance led to a security checkpoint where a guard checked his ID against a list, handed him a badge, and directed him to the second floor. Evan climbed stairs that smelled of industrial cleaner and concrete, his heart hammering. The second floor opened onto a massive open workspace, dozens of desks arranged in clusters, computer monitors glowing, the sound of ringing phones and low conversations creating a constant hum of activity. Through windows along one wall, Evan could see down into the warehouse floor itself, a vast cavern of shelving units and forklifts and workers moving with practiced efficiency. "Evan Cole?" He turned to find a man in his 50s approaching, heavy-set and balding, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent decades in places like this. He wore the same dark blue polo shirt as everyone else, with Cross Technologies embroidered on the chest. "Yes, sir." "Rick Brennan, Center Director. Follow me." They walked through the workspace, Brennan moving with the heavy authority of someone who'd earned his position through years of grinding work. He didn't speak, didn't look at Evan, just led him to a glass-walled conference room in the corner. Inside, 4 other people waited. 3 men, 1 woman, all wearing the same polo shirt. They looked up as Evan entered, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. "Everyone," Brennan said, shutting the door behind them. "This is Evan Cole. As of today, he's your new operations supervisor for Team Delta." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. One of the men, young, maybe 30, with arms covered in tattoos, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "No offense," he said, his tone making it clear offense was exactly what he intended. "But who the hell is Evan Cole, and why is he supervising anything?" Brennan's jaw tightened. "Because Ms. Cross personally selected him for the position. That's all you need to know, Garcia." "Ms. Cross doesn't work the floor," Garcia shot back. "We do, and we've never even heard of this guy." The woman, mid-40s with short-cropped hair and a name tag that read Sullivan, studied Evan with shrewd eyes. "What's your background?" she asked. Evan swallowed. "Mechanical engineering. 3 years in aerospace before the layoffs. Logistics experience? No. Management experience? No." "Wonderful," Garcia muttered. Sullivan exchanged a glance with one of the other men, something passing between them that Evan couldn't read. Brennan cleared his throat. "Cole will be learning on the job. I expect all of you to bring him up to speed. Team Delta is currently down 2 supervisors, and we're running at capacity. Cole, your team handles inbound receiving and quality control. You've got 40 people under you, and they move approximately 200,000 units per day." The numbers made Evan's head spin. You'll start by shadowing Sullivan for the morning, Brennan continued. After lunch, you're on your own. Questions? 100, 1,000. No, sir, Evan said. Good. Don't screw this up. Brennan looked at the others. Meeting adjourned. They filed out, Garcia shooting Evan one last contemptuous look. Sullivan waited, her expression unreadable. Come on, she said finally. Try to keep up. The warehouse floor was organized chaos. Everywhere Evan looked, there was movement. Forklifts darting between towering shelves, workers scanning barcodes, conveyor belts moving boxes in endless streams. The noise was incredible, a constant roar of machinery and shouted instructions and beeping scanners. Sullivan led him to a section near the receiving docks where his team was already hard at work. She moved through them with practiced ease, calling out names, checking on progress, making small corrections that seemed to keep everything flowing smoothly. This is the bottleneck, she shouted over the noise, pointing to where trucks backed up to the loading docks. Shipments arrive every 15 minutes during peak hours. Your team has to unload, scan, sort, and quality check every single item before it goes to storage. Fall behind, and you create a cascade failure that affects the entire operation. How do we not fall behind? You watch everything. You know your people. You anticipate problems before they happen. She glanced at him. Think you can do that? I'll have to. They spent the morning moving through the operation, Sullivan explaining the systems, the workflow, the 100 little details that kept everything running. Evan absorbed it all, his engineer's mind automatically creating frameworks, seeing patterns. But he also saw something else. The workers, his workers, kept glancing at him. Some were curious, some were skeptical, and a few looked outright resentful, as if his presence was a personal insult. At 11:30, a problem arose. One of the scanning stations went down, its screen frozen. The worker standing at it, a young woman with purple highlights in her hair, swore and looked around frantically. Sullivan, she called, but Sullivan was across the floor dealing with something else. The woman saw Evan and hesitated. The scanner's dead, she said. If we don't get it back up in 2 minutes, we're going to start backing up the line. Evan moved to the station, his mind already working. He'd seen enough engineering problems to know that the first step was always diagnosis. When did it freeze? 30 seconds ago, right in the middle of a scan. He checked the connections, rebooted the system, watched it cycle through startup. Nothing. The screen stayed frozen on a logo. Behind them, boxes were beginning to pile up on the conveyor belt. Come on, the woman muttered. Come on. Evan pulled out his phone and took a picture of the error code displayed in small text at the bottom of the screen. Then he pulled up the troubleshooting section of the handbook he'd memorized and started cross-referencing. There, he said, pointing. Network timeout. The station's not connecting to the main server. Can you fix it? Maybe. He crawled under the desk, found the Ethernet cable, saw that it had been partially pulled free from its port. He reseated it, heard it click, and the system immediately came back to life. The woman at the station let out a breath. Oh, thank God. She looked at Evan with something that might have been respect. Thanks. I'm Angela, by the way. Evan, I know who you are. You're the guy everyone's talking about. What are they saying? Angela's smile was wry. That you're either Ms. Cross's secret weapon or the world's luckiest idiot. No consensus yet. Before Evan could respond, Sullivan appeared at his elbow. Good catch, she said quietly. But don't get cocky. That was easy. Everything after lunch won't be. She was right. At 1 p.m., Sullivan left him on his own, and Evan suddenly understood what it meant to be thrown into the deep end. Problems arose constantly. A forklift breakdown, a shipment with incorrect documentation, 2 workers who got into a shouting match over scheduling. He handled them as best he could, relying on common sense and the handbook and sheer stubborn determination not to fail on his first day. By 5 p.m., he was exhausted. By 7, when his shift finally ended, he felt like he'd aged a decade. He made it to his car before his legs gave out. He sat behind the wheel, head back, eyes closed, and tried to remember how to breathe. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Day 1 complete. How do you feel? Evan stared at it, then typed back. Like I got hit by a truck. The response came immediately. Good. That means you're learning. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be harder. There was no signature, but Evan knew who it was from. He drove home in the dark, picked up Marcus from Mrs. Chen's, made dinner out of whatever was in the fridge. Marcus talked about his day, and Evan listened, trying to be present even though every muscle in his body ached. How was your first day, Dad? Evan looked at his son and managed a smile. Hard, he said honestly. But good. Are you going to quit? Not a chance, buddy. Marcus grinned. That's what I told Jackson. I said my dad doesn't quit. Later, after Marcus was asleep, Evan sat at the kitchen table with his employee handbook and notes from the day. He reviewed everything, identifying where he'd succeeded, where he'd struggled, what he needed to learn. He thought about Madeline's words again. I'm testing your character. But how? What was she looking for? What came next? He didn't know. But sitting there in the quiet, Evan felt something he hadn't felt in years, something dangerous and precious and almost forgotten. Purpose. Not just survival, not just grinding through each day, but the sense that he was building towards something, that his choices mattered, that maybe, just maybe, the note on the windshield hadn't been stupid after all. It had been the beginning. The second week began with what Brennan called a routine audit. Evan arrived at 6 a.m. to find the entire warehouse buzzing with nervous energy. Workers moved faster, spoke quieter, kept their stations obsessively organized. Sullivan pulled him aside near the coffee station, her expression grim. Corporate's sending an inspection team, she said quietly. They do this twice a year, show up unannounced, tear everything apart looking for violations. Safety, productivity, quality control. Anything they can write up. What happens if we fail? Depends on what they find. Minor stuff, we get warnings. Major stuff. She paused. People lose their jobs. Sometimes the whole shift gets restructured. Evan felt ice settle in his stomach. He'd been here 10 days. He was still learning where the bathrooms were. When do they arrive? Could be today, could be next week. That's the point. Keep everyone on edge. Sullivan checked her watch. Just keep your team running clean. No shortcuts, no safety violations, everything by the book. You do that, you'll be fine. But as the morning shift kicked into full gear, Evan quickly realized that running by the book was easier said than done. The pressure to move product was relentless. Trucks arrived in an endless stream, each one packed with goods that needed to be unloaded, scanned, sorted, and stored within strict time windows. Fall behind schedule, and the entire distribution network suffered. Customer orders got delayed. Retail stores ran out of stock. The company lost money. And someone got blamed. Evan watched his team work, saw the small compromises they made to keep pace. A forklift driver taking a corner too fast. Someone skipping the second verification scan to save 30 seconds. Workers stacking boxes higher than regulation height because it was faster than making 2 trips. He'd let most of it slide during his first week, too overwhelmed to fight every battle. But now, with an audit looming, every shortcut felt like a ticking bomb. At 10:30, he caught one of his workers, a middle-aged man named Terry who'd been with the company for 8 years, trying to move a pallet loaded beyond the safe weight limit. Terry, hold up. Terry glanced at him, then at the pallet, then back. It's fine. I've done heavier. The limit's 1,500 pounds. That's got to be close to 2,000. Which is why I need to move it now instead of breaking it down. We're already behind on this shipment. Evan stepped in front of the forklift. Break it down. 2 trips. Terry's jaw tightened. Around them, other workers had stopped to watch. Evan felt their eyes on him, felt the weight of this moment. He was the new guy, the outsider, the one who didn't know how things really worked. You're going to cost us 15 minutes, Terry said flatly. And you're going to cost us a lot more if that pallet tips and buries someone. They stared at each other. Then Terry killed the forklift engine and climbed down, his movements sharp with anger. He began breaking down the pallet in silence, and the other workers slowly returned to their tasks. Sullivan appeared at Evan's elbow. You just made an enemy, she said quietly. I made the safe call. Safe doesn't always make you popular. She studied him, but it was the right call. The rest of the day passed without incident, but Evan could feel the shift in atmosphere. His team was watching him differently now, testing boundaries, wondering how far they could push before he pushed back. That evening, Madeline sent another text. Heard about the palate. Good instincts. Evan stared at the message, something cold crawling up his spine. She was watching. Not just him, everything, every decision, every moment, every choice he made was being observed and evaluated by someone he couldn't see. The test was ongoing. He just didn't know what he was being tested for. The audit team arrived on Thursday. 3 people in dark suits carrying tablets and clipboards, led by a severe woman who introduced herself as Marion Fletcher from corporate compliance. She shook Brennan's hand with all the warmth of a tax collector, then immediately began walking the floor with sharp, measuring eyes. Brennan gathered the supervisors in the conference room. They'll be here for 3 days, he said, his voice tight. They're going to observe operations, interview workers, review documentation. Do not, and I mean do not, try to hide anything or lie to them. If they ask a question, you answer truthfully. If there's a problem, you acknowledge it. Understood? Everyone nodded. Cole, since you're new, they'll probably focus on your section. Team Delta has been inconsistent lately. Just be honest with them. After the meeting, Garcia cornered Evan in the hallway. You know this is on you, right? Garcia said, his voice low and angry. They're going to see that Delta's got a supervisor with 0 experience, and they're going to tear us apart. Then we don't give them anything to find. Garcia laughed bitterly. You really don't get how this works, do you? They always find something, and when they do, the new guy gets blamed. He walked away before Evan could respond. The first day of the audit was pure tension. Fletcher and her team moved through the warehouse like ghosts, appearing suddenly at workstations, asking pointed questions, making notes that might mean nothing or everything. Evan kept his team running smoothly, double-checking every procedure, making sure every safety protocol was followed to the letter. At 2 p.m., Fletcher appeared at his shoulder. Mr. Cole, a word. They walked to a quiet corner of the warehouse. Fletcher studied her tablet, then looked up at him with eyes that gave away nothing. I'm reviewing your team's productivity metrics from the past 2 weeks. You're running approximately 11% below the target threshold. Evan's stomach sank. We've been prioritizing safety and accuracy over speed. That's admirable, but this is a business, not a philosophy seminar. The targets exist for a reason. She scrolled through her tablet. I also see you've only been in this position for 12 days. That's unusual. What's your background? Engineering, aerospace. Logistics experience? I'm learning. Clearly, she made another note. I'll be observing your team's operations tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Be prepared to walk me through your workflow and explain why your numbers are below standard. She left without waiting for a response. That night, Evan stayed late, reviewing every metric, every process, every decision he'd made. The numbers didn't lie. His team was slower than the others, but they also had fewer safety incidents, lower error rates, and 0 damaged goods claims. He'd traded speed for quality. Was that wrong? He didn't know anymore. His phone rang at 9 p.m. Marcus, calling from Mrs. Chen's house. Dad, when are you coming home? Evan closed his eyes, leaning back in his chair. Soon, buddy. I'm sorry. Work's been crazy. You said you wouldn't have to work as much. I know I did. This is just temporary, okay? Things will calm down. Silence on the other end. Then, in a small voice, okay. I love you, Marcus. Love you too. After he hung up, Evan sat in the empty office and let himself feel the full weight of what he'd taken on. He was failing his son. He was barely holding together his team. He was being audited by people looking for reasons to fire him. And somewhere in the distance, Madeline Cross was watching, waiting to see if he'd crack. He thought about the note on the windshield, about the choice that had led him here. Had it been worth it? The question haunted him all the way home. Friday morning arrived with the weight of Judgment Day. Fletcher appeared at exactly 7 a.m., flanked by her 2 assistants, all of them carrying tablets that glowed with data Evan couldn't see. Mr. Cole, show me your operation. They walked the floor together, Evan explaining each station, each process, each decision point. Fletcher asked sharp questions, and Evan answered as honestly as he could. His team worked under the scrutiny, their faces tight with concentration. At the quality control station, Fletcher stopped. "This is your bottleneck," she said, pointing at the backlog of items waiting for inspection. "You're running 2 checkers when the standard is 1. That's cutting your throughput significantly." "The error rate drops by 40% with 2 checkers," Evan said. "One person catches what the other misses." "At the cost of speed." "At the benefit of accuracy." Fletcher's expression didn't change. "Show me your error logs." Evan pulled up the data on a nearby terminal. For the past 2 weeks, Team Delta had logged fewer errors than any other section in the warehouse. Damaged goods, incorrect shipments, misrouted inventory, all of it was down. Fletcher studied the numbers for a long moment. "Interesting," she said finally. "Walk me through your safety protocols." They spent the next hour reviewing every safety measure Evan had implemented or enforced, the weight limits he'd maintained, the additional training he'd requested for forklift operators, the reorganization of the loading dock to reduce congestion. Fletcher made notes. Her assistants made notes. Evan had no idea if he was passing or failing. At 9 a.m., she finally spoke. "Your productivity numbers are below target, Mr. Cole, but your safety record is exemplary, and your quality metrics are the best in this facility." She paused. "That's a trade-off most supervisors aren't willing to make. They push for speed and hope nothing breaks. Is that a problem?" "That depends on what you're optimizing for." She closed her tablet. "I'll include my full assessment in the final report. You'll have it by Monday." She walked away, leaving Evan standing in the middle of the warehouse floor with absolutely no idea whether he'd just saved his job or lost it. The weekend crawled by. Evan tried to focus on Marcus, took him to a movie, helped with homework, did all the normal father things. But his mind kept returning to the audit, to Fletcher's unreadable expression, to the numbers that said he was both succeeding and failing simultaneously. Monday morning, Brennan called him into the conference room before the shift started. The center director looked tired, older somehow, as if the audit had aged him. "Close the door," Brennan said. Evan did, his heart pounding. The audit results came back. Overall, the facility passed with minor citations, nothing that'll affect operations. Brennan paused. "Your section specifically was complicated." "Complicated how?" Fletcher wrote that Team Delta shows the strongest safety culture and quality standards in the building, but the lowest productivity numbers. Brennan leaned back in his chair. "She recommended you for additional management training and suggested we use your protocols as a model for other teams." Evan blinked. "She... what?" "At the same time, corporate wants those productivity numbers up. They're giving you 30 days to bring Delta up to standard throughput without sacrificing safety or quality." Brennan's expression was sympathetic. "I know that sounds impossible, but those are the terms." "And if I can't?" "Then we restructure. You move to a different role, probably a demotion. Someone else takes Delta." Evan felt the walls closing in. 30 days. "Starting today." Brennan stood. "Look, Cole, between you and me, you're doing good work, but good work isn't always enough. You need to figure out how to do it faster, or none of this matters." The conversation ended, and Evan walked to the floor in a daze. 30 days. He had 30 days to solve a problem that seemed fundamentally unsolvable. How do you move faster without cutting corners? His team was already assembled for the morning briefing. They looked at him expectantly, waiting for direction. Angela, Terry, Sullivan standing nearby, Garcia watching from across the room with his arms crossed. Evan took a breath. "Okay," he said, "we need to talk about our numbers." He spent the next 20 minutes laying out the situation honestly. The audit results, the deadline, the impossible task ahead. He didn't sugarcoat it, didn't pretend it would be easy. "I'm not asking you to work unsafely," he said. "That's non-negotiable, but I'm asking you to help me find inefficiencies. Places where we're wasting time, duplicating effort, creating unnecessary steps. We've got 30 days to get faster without getting sloppy." Terry raised his hand. "And if we can't? Then we all probably get reassigned. New supervisor, new team structure, new everything." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Angela spoke up. "The documentation system is garbage. We're entering the same data 3 times in different formats. If we could streamline that..." The staging area layout is inefficient, someone else added. We're moving product twice when once should be enough. More voices joined in. Ideas, suggestions, complaints that had been festering for months or years. Evan listened to all of it, writing everything down, and felt something shift. They weren't just his team anymore. They were invested. They had 30 days. They got to work. The changes started small. Evan and Angela spent a night redesigning the data entry workflow, eliminating redundant steps. Terry worked with the forklift operators to optimize their routes. Sullivan helped reorganize the staging area to reduce unnecessary movement. Productivity climbed, 4% the first week, 7% the second. But it wasn't enough. Evan started arriving at 5 a.m., staying until 8 p.m., analyzing every second of the workflow. He studied industrial engineering principles, watched videos of other facilities, consulted the handbook until he had sections memorized. Marcus complained about never seeing him. Mrs. Chen started charging extra for the late pickups. Evan felt himself fraying at the edges. In the middle of the third week, Garcia approached him during lunch. "You're killing yourself over this," Garcia said, sitting down across from him. "You know that, right? I don't have a choice." "There's always a choice. You could ease up on the safety protocols, just a little. No one would notice and it'd buy you the speed you need." Evan looked up sharply. "No. I'm not saying abandon them, just bend a little. That's how everyone else does it." "Not on my team," Garcia sighed. "Then you're going to fail, and when you do, the rest of us pay the price." He left his food untouched and walked away. That night, Evan sat in his car in the parking lot and seriously considered it. What if Garcia was right? What if the only way to survive was to compromise, just slightly, just enough to hit the numbers? He pulled out his phone and stared at Madeline's last text. "I'm testing your character." Character, not results. Not productivity, character. But character didn't pay the bills. Character didn't keep him employed. Character was a luxury for people who could afford principles. Wasn't it? His phone buzzed. A new message from Madeline. The hard thing and the right thing are usually the same thing. Evan stared at the screen for a long time. Then he deleted the message, started his car, and drove home to his son. The breakthrough came on day 23. Evan was reviewing the shipping schedule when he noticed something odd. Certain suppliers delivered at overlapping times, creating bottlenecks at the loading docks. But if they could coordinate deliveries differently, stagger the arrival windows, they could process trucks faster without rushing. He called the suppliers. Most said it was impossible. 2 said they'd try. The next day, those 2 deliveries arrived an hour apart instead of simultaneously. The difference was immediate. The team processed both shipments faster because they weren't competing for dock space. Evan called more suppliers, negotiated, begged, explained the situation. By day 28, he had 12 suppliers on staggered schedules. Productivity jumped to 94% of target. Close. So close. But not enough. Day 29. Evan was running on caffeine and desperation, watching the clock tick down to his deadline, when Sullivan found him in the break room. "I've got an idea," she said, "but you're not going to like it. Tell me anyway. We consolidate the 2 quality control stations into one position. Use the freed up worker to help with receiving. That'll give us the speed boost we need." Evan felt his chest tighten. "That puts us back to 1 checker. The error rate will climb." "Maybe, or maybe not. Your people are better trained now than they were a month ago. Maybe they don't need as much oversight." "And if I'm wrong? If the errors come back?" Sullivan met his eyes. "Then you made a judgment call. But you're out of time, Evan. You either trust your team or you don't." Evan spent that entire night thinking about it. Trust. That's what it came down to. Could he trust his team to maintain quality without the safety net he'd built? The next morning, day 30, he made the change. 1 quality checker instead of 2. The freed worker moved to receiving. The team moved like a machine, faster, smoother. Evan watched the numbers climb in real time, 96%, 97, 98. At 11 a.m., they hit 100% of target throughput. At noon, Brennan walked onto the floor with his tablet, checked the numbers, and nodded slowly. "You did it," he said. Evan felt his legs go weak. We did it. No errors? Not one. Brennan clapped him on the shoulder. I'll be honest, Cole. I didn't think you'd pull this off. But you proved me wrong. He paused. Miss Cross wants to see you. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., her office. The familiar ice returned to Evan's stomach. Did she say why? No. But I'd guess it's good news. You just did something most supervisors can't. That evening, Evan took Marcus out for pizza, real pizza, not the frozen kind. They sat in a booth, and Marcus talked excitedly about school, about his friends, about a science project on volcanoes that was due next week. Dad, you seem happy, Marcus said, tomato sauce on his chin. I am, buddy. Work's getting better. Yeah, I think it is. Good. I like it when you're happy. Evan reached across the table and ruffled his son's hair. Me too. But that night, lying in bed, Evan couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. The tests weren't over. Madeline hadn't put him through all of this just to see if he could hit productivity targets. There was something more. He just didn't know what yet. The next morning, Evan stood once again in front of the Cross Technologies building, staring up at its gleaming facade. 3 weeks had passed since his last visit, but it felt like years. He was different now, harder, maybe. Definitely more tired. Patricia met him in the lobby and escorted him upstairs without a word. When they reached Madeline's office, she knocked once and stepped aside. She's expecting you. Evan entered to find Madeline standing at her windows, looking out over the city. She didn't turn when he came in. Close the door, Mr. Cole. He did. Congratulations on meeting your targets, she said to the glass. Rick tells me you managed it without compromising your safety standards. Yes, ma'am. How did it feel? The pressure, the impossible deadline, the certainty that you'd fail? Evan chose his words carefully. Like I was being tested. Because you were. She finally turned to face him. I set that deadline. I told corporate to give you 30 days, knowing it was barely enough time. I wanted to see what you'd do when everything was on the line. The admission landed like a punch. You set me up? I gave you a challenge. There's a difference. Madeline walked to her desk. Most people, when pushed that hard, compromise. They cut corners. They cheat. They blame others. They quit. But you did none of those things. I thought about it, Evan said honestly. Came close a few times. But you didn't. That's what matters. She sat down, gesturing for him to do the same. Do you know why I'm really testing you, Mr. Cole? Not entirely. Because I'm getting old. Because this company will outlive me. And I need to know it'll be in the right hands when I'm gone. Her pale eyes locked onto his. I've spent 7 years looking for someone with real integrity. Not the performed kind. Not the convenient kind. The kind that holds even when it costs everything. Evan's mouth went dry. You're talking about succession. Eventually, years from now. But first, you need to understand what this company really does. How it really works. She pulled a folder from her desk drawer. I'm moving you. Effective immediately, you're no longer supervising Team Delta. The bottom dropped out of Evan's stomach. What? But you're being promoted. Assistant Operations Manager reporting directly to me. You'll have oversight of all 4 teams, work with Brennan on facility-wide strategy, and help me solve the company's biggest problems. Evan couldn't speak. Your salary increases to $95,000 with performance bonuses that can take you to $130,000. Your son gets added to the company health plan, and you get an office. She slid the folder across the desk. Read it over. If you accept, you start Monday. Evan opened the folder with shaking hands. The contract inside outlined everything she'd said, plus benefits he'd never dreamed of. Retirement matching, education assistance, even a relocation allowance if he needed it. Why me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Because you left a note on a windshield when you didn't have to. Because you chose safety over speed even when your job depended on it. Because when I push you to the breaking point, you don't break. Madeline leaned forward. I need people I can trust, Mr. Cole. Truly trust. In this company, at this level, integrity isn't optional. It's everything. Evan thought about Marcus, about Mrs. Chen, about the past 3 weeks of hell that had just been revealed as another test in a series of tests he hadn't known he was taking. What happens next? He asked. Madeline smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "Now?" she said. "Now the real work begins." Evan's new office was a glass cube on the third floor with a view of the warehouse below. He stood at the window on his first morning as assistant operations manager, watching the shifts change, and felt like an imposter. 3 months ago, he'd been stocking shelves at a grocery store. Now he had a salary that felt obscene, an office with his name on the door, and responsibilities that terrified him. His phone buzzed. "Madeline. Conference room B, now." He found her already seated at the head of a long table, flanked by 3 people he'd never seen before. She gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Mr. Cole, meet your team. David Chen, Supply Chain Analytics. Rebecca Morrison, Vendor Relations. And James Keller, Quality Assurance." She didn't wait for pleasantries. "We have a problem. 6 weeks ago, one of our largest clients, North Point Retail, 300 stores nationwide, reported receiving damaged goods in 18% of their shipments. That's up from our standard 3%. Rebecca leaned forward, her expression tight. "They're threatening to terminate the contract if we don't fix it by the end of the quarter. That's 8 weeks away. If we lose North Point, we lose $40 million in annual revenue." "What's causing the damage?" Evan asked. David pulled up a presentation on the screen behind Madeline. Charts and graphs filled the display, all of them trending in the wrong direction. "We've traced it back to handling issues at 3 distribution centers, including this one. Goods are being mishandled during loading, damaged in transit, or improperly stored. So we fixed the handling procedures." "It's not that simple," James said. "The damage is happening at different points in different facilities. No consistent pattern. We've tried retraining staff, implementing new protocols, even replacing equipment. Nothing's working." Madeline's pale eyes found Evan. "I'm putting you in charge of solving this. You have full authority to investigate, make changes, and do whatever's necessary to bring those numbers down. Questions?" Evan had about 1,000, but he settled on the most important one. "Why me? These people have way more experience than I do." "Because they've been trying to solve this for 6 weeks and failed. You're not burdened by their assumptions." She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "You have 8 weeks, Mr. Cole. Don't waste them." After she left, the 3 remaining executives stared at Evan with expressions ranging from skeptical to hostile. Rebecca spoke first, her tone clipped. "Look, no offense, but we've been with this company for years. We know these systems inside and out. If we couldn't fix this, what makes Madeline think you can?" "I don't know," Evan said honestly, "but I'm going to try anyway." David's laugh was bitter. "Great. Another hero complex. You know what the real problem is? The clients want premium service at budget prices. Something's got to give, and it's usually quality. But sure, go ahead and save the day." They filed out, leaving Evan alone with his inadequacy and 8 weeks to prevent a catastrophe he barely understood. He spent the rest of the day buried in data. Damage reports, shipping manifests, incident logs, employee records. The numbers told a story, but Evan couldn't quite read it. The damage was random. Different products, different handlers, different times of day. No pattern, except there had to be a pattern. There was always a pattern. At 7 p.m., he drove to the first facility Rebecca had mentioned, a distribution center 40 miles north. The night shift supervisor, a woman named Janet, who looked perpetually exhausted, walked him through the operation. "We've changed everything," she said, her voice carrying frustration. "New training programs, new equipment, new safety protocols. Damage rate hasn't budged. Show me your loading area." They walked to the shipping docks where workers were loading a truck destined for North Point. Evan watched them work, saw nothing obviously wrong. They handled boxes carefully, stacked them properly, used equipment correctly, but then he noticed something small. One of the workers, a young guy with headphones on, set down a box marked fragile with slightly more force than necessary. Not enough to cause visible damage, just enough to compromise whatever was inside. "How long has he been with you?" Evan asked Janet. "Marcus? Maybe 3 months. Why?" "Watch him." They observed for another 10 minutes. Marcus worked fast, efficient, but every few boxes there was that same slight carelessness. A box set down too hard. A stack built slightly off-center. Small things. Individually meaningless, but multiplied across hundreds of boxes, across 3 shifts, across multiple facilities? Do you have a retention problem? Evan asked. Janet blinked. What? High turnover. New workers coming in, experienced ones leaving. Well, yeah, it's warehouse work. People don't usually stick around. Evan pulled out his phone and started comparing the damage reports with employee records. The correlation was immediate and damning. The facilities with the highest damage rates had the highest turnover. The sections within those facilities with the worst numbers had the newest workers. It wasn't about training or equipment or procedures. It was about institutional knowledge, about the little things experienced workers knew that couldn't be written in a manual, about muscle memory and judgment that only came with time. And Cross Technologies had been bleeding experienced workers for months. He drove back to the main facility at midnight, his mind racing. The next morning, he called a meeting with David, Rebecca, and James. It's retention, he said, laying out his findings. We're losing experienced workers and replacing them with new hires who don't have the instincts to handle goods properly. No amount of training fixes that. It's learned over time. Rebecca frowned. So what's your solution? We can't force people to stay. No, but we can find out why they're leaving. Evan pulled up spreadsheets showing turnover rates. I want to conduct exit interviews with everyone who's quit in the last 6 months. Real interviews, not HR forms. I want to know why they walked away. That'll take weeks, David protested. Then we'd better start now. We've got 7.5 weeks left. Over the next 10 days, Evan personally interviewed 43 former employees. He drove to their homes, met them at coffee shops, called them during his lunch breaks. Most were reluctant to talk at first, but Evan had learned something about honesty in the past few months. It invited honesty in return. And what they told him was damning. The pay was below industry standard. Benefits were minimal. There was no clear path for advancement. Supervisors played favorites. Concerns went ignored. The work was hard, the gratitude non-existent, and better opportunities existed everywhere else. They'd left because Cross Technologies had treated them as replaceable. Evan compiled everything into a report and presented it to Madeline on a Wednesday afternoon. She read it in silence, her expression unreadable. You're saying we created this problem ourselves, she said finally. Yes. And the solution is what? Pay raises, better benefits? That's expensive. More expensive than losing North Point? Madeline set down the report. If I approve this, we're looking at increased labor costs across all facilities. Millions annually. The board won't like it. The board will like losing $40 million in revenue even less. She studied him for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and made a call. Get me the head of HR and schedule an emergency board meeting for Friday. 2 days later, Evan sat in a conference room with 12 board members who looked at him like he was suggesting they set money on fire. He presented his findings, showed the correlation, explained the human cost of treating workers as expendable. A silver-haired man in an expensive suit interrupted him. Mr. Cole, you're proposing we increase our labor costs by approximately 8%. That's a significant hit to our margins. It's an investment, Evan replied. Experienced workers are more efficient, make fewer mistakes, and don't need constant training. Over time, this pays for itself. Over time. But in the short term? In the short term, we keep North Point and the $40 million in revenue they represent. The discussion that followed was brutal. Half the board thought Evan was naive. The other half thought he was right, but worried about the financial impact. The meeting ran 3 hours, and when it finally ended, Madeline walked him to the elevator. That was quite a performance, she said. Did it work? The board approved a pilot program, 3 facilities, 6 months, full implementation of your recommendations. If the damage rates drop and retention improves, we expand it company-wide. She pressed the elevator button. You just bet your reputation on the idea that treating people decently is good business. I've made worse bets. Have you? Her smile was thin. We'll see. The pilot program launched the following Monday. Immediate pay increases for warehouse workers, $2 more per hour, expanded benefits, a clear promotion track, anonymous feedback systems. Regular town halls where management actually listened. The pushback was immediate. Supervisors complained about the cost. Some board members leaked their opposition to the press. Industry analysts called it unsustainable. But Madeline had made her decision, and Madeline's word was law. Evan spent the next month visiting all 3 pilot facilities, meeting with workers, listening to concerns, making adjustments. Slowly, incrementally, things began to change. Turnover slowed, training improved, the damage rate started dropping, but not fast enough. 6 weeks into the 8-week deadline, North Point was still reporting 14% damaged goods. Better than 18, but nowhere near the 3% they demanded. Evan was running out of time, and he knew it. He was working late on a Friday when his phone rang. Marcus. "Dad, you said you'd be home by dinner." Evan looked at his watch, 8:30. "I know, buddy. I'm sorry. I lost track of time." "You always lose track of time." Marcus's voice was small, hurt in a way that cut deeper than any client complaint. "Mrs. Chen said you're working too much again." "This is important, Marcus. If I don't figure this out, everything's always important." A pause. "I miss you, Dad." The words landed like a punch to the chest. Evan closed his eyes, pressing his palm against his forehead. He'd been here before, working himself to death, telling himself it was for his son, while his son grew up without him. "I'll be home in 20 minutes, Evan said. "We'll watch a movie. Whatever you want." "Promise?" "Promise." He kept his word. But as he sat on the couch next to Marcus, watching some animated film about talking cars, his mind kept returning to the problem. 14%. He needed to get it down to 3. How? The answer came to him in the middle of the night. He'd been focused on retention, on keeping experienced workers. But what about making new workers better, faster? What if he could compress that learning curve? The next morning, he called Sullivan. "I need you to help me design a mentorship program. Pair every new hire with a veteran worker for their first 90 days. Not just training, actual mentorship. The experienced worker gets a bonus for every month their mentee stays. The mentee gets direct access to someone who can teach them all those little things that prevent damage." Sullivan was quiet for a moment. "That'll slow down the veterans. They can't move as fast if they're teaching. Short-term pain, long-term gain. We need to stop the bleeding." "When do we start?" "Today." The mentorship program launched across all 3 pilot facilities within a week. The veterans grumbled about the extra responsibility until they saw the bonuses. The new hires thrived with personal guidance, and slowly, carefully, the damage rates continued to drop. 13%. 12. 11. 2 weeks before the deadline, Evan got called into Madeline's office. She was on the phone when he arrived, her expression severe. She gestured for him to sit and wait. "I understand your concerns," she said to whoever was on the other end, "but Mr. Cole has made significant progress." "Yes, I'm aware it's not enough yet. I'm asking for 2 more weeks." "I see. I'll inform him." She hung up and looked at Evan with something that might have been sympathy. That was North Point. They're not extending the deadline. 8 weeks was 8 weeks. If we're not at 3% by next Friday, they're terminating the contract effective immediately. Evan felt the floor drop out from under him. "We're at 11%. We need more time. We don't have it." Madeline stood and walked to her window. "I backed you, Mr. Cole. I fought the board, pushed through changes, invested millions in your theory, and we're going to lose anyway. 1 more week, that's all I need." "I don't have 1 more week to give." Evan's mind raced. 7 days. How could he drop the damage rate by 8 percentage points in 7 days? And then he thought of something. "What if the problem isn't just us?" he said slowly. "What if some of the damage is happening during transport, not at our facilities?" Madeline turned. "We don't control the trucking." "No, but North Point does. They choose the carriers." Evan pulled out his phone, scrolling through notes. "I've been looking at this as a warehouse problem, but what if it's a supply chain problem? What if their carriers are damaging goods and blaming us?" "That's a serious accusation." "It's a testable hypothesis. Let me inspect a shipment from start to finish, track it from our dock to their store. If I can prove the damage is happening in transit, we can document it, show North Point they're using the wrong carriers." Madeline considered this. "You have 7 days. I only need 3. She picked up her phone. "I'll arrange access, but Cole, if you're wrong about this, we're done. No extensions, no second chances. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." He left her office and immediately started coordinating. He needed a shipment going to North Point, needed to track it obsessively, needed to be there at every handoff point. It was a long shot, maybe even desperate, but it was all he had left. The shipment left the warehouse Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. Evan watched every box get loaded personally, documented everything with photos and detailed notes. Nothing was damaged when it left their facility. He knew that absolutely. He followed the truck to the carrier's distribution hub, watched the transfer, saw the handlers throw boxes around with careless efficiency that made his blood boil. He documented everything. Then he followed the boxes to the final delivery at a North Point store in the suburbs. When the truck arrived at 4 p.m., he helped unload. Out of 50 boxes, 7 showed visible damage. None of that damage existed when the shipment left Cross Technologies. Evan compiled his evidence, photos, timestamps, witness statements from truck drivers who admitted the carriers were understaffed and overworked. He sent everything to Madeline with a simple message: "It's not us." Thursday morning, Madeline called an emergency meeting with North Point's executives. Evan presented his findings in a conference room that felt like a courtroom. The North Point people listened with skeptical expressions, but the evidence was irrefutable. Their own carriers were destroying goods, then blaming Cross Technologies. The head of North Point procurement, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Wells, studied Evan's documentation for a long time. "This is embarrassing," she said finally. "We've been blaming you for our own vendors' incompetence." "The important thing is we identified the problem," Madeline said smoothly. "Now we can work together to fix it." Catherine nodded slowly. "We'll terminate our relationship with these carriers immediately and find better partners. As for Cross Technologies," she looked at Madeline, "the contract stands. I'm sorry for the accusations." Relief washed over Evan so completely he nearly laughed. After the North Point executives left, Madeline turned to him. "Well done, Mr. Cole. That was impressive investigative work." "I got lucky." "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. You were prepared." She paused. "But there's something you need to understand. What you just experienced, that pressure, that impossible deadline, that feeling of everything collapsing around you." "Yes." "That was another test." Evan froze. "What?" Madeline's expression was unreadable. "I knew about the carrier problem 3 weeks ago. I could have told North Point then, but I wanted to see what you'd do when you thought you were failing. When the easy path was to blame others, to make excuses, to cover your own exposure." The words hit like ice water. You let me think I was going to cost the company $40 million? I needed to see if you'd take responsibility or shift blame, if you'd dig deeper or give up, if you'd protect yourself or fight for the truth." She leaned forward. "And you did exactly what I hoped. You kept investigating until you found the real problem, even though it would have been easier to just accept defeat." Evan stood abruptly, his hands shaking. "That's not a test. That's manipulation." "It's both." Madeline's voice remained calm. "And yes, it's brutal. But the position I'm grooming you for requires someone who can handle brutal pressure without breaking. Someone who seeks truth even when it's inconvenient. Someone who won't compromise even when compromise seems rational." "What position?" Evan's voice was barely controlled. "You keep testing me, pushing me, but you won't tell me what this is actually about." For the first time since he'd met her, Madeline's expression softened slightly. "The board wants me to retire in 3 years. They're pushing for my CFO to take over, a man who's brilliant with numbers and morally flexible in ways that terrify me. I've been searching for an alternative, someone I can train, someone I can trust to lead this company the right way." The implications settled over Evan like a weight. "You want me to run Cross Technologies. Eventually, after years of training, after you've proven yourself 100 more times, after I'm certain you won't become what so many others become when they have power." She stood. "But first, you need to understand something critical. In 2 weeks, we're conducting a facilities-wide safety inspection. It's standard, routine, happens every year." "Okay." "Our largest warehouse in the network, Facility 9, 2 hours south of here, has been reporting perfect safety scores for 18 months. 0 incidents. Not a single violation." Madeline's eyes hardened. "I don't believe it." "You think they're falsifying reports?" I think someone is, and I need you to find out who and why. Because if they're lying about safety, eventually someone's going to get hurt. And when they do, it won't just be a PR problem. It'll be a moral one. Evan felt exhaustion pulling at him. More tests, more pressure, more impossible situations designed to see if he'd break. But he thought about Marcus, about the life he was trying to build, about the note on a windshield that had started all of this. "When do I leave?" he asked. Madeline almost smiled. "Monday morning. And Cole? Be careful down there. Whoever's falsifying those reports has a lot to lose if you expose them." The warning hung in the air between them, and Evan understood that the real test was just beginning. Facility 9 sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by flat farmland and accessed by a single two-lane highway that stretched toward the horizon like a promise that went nowhere. Evan made the drive Monday morning in a rental car, watching the landscape empty out as he left the city behind. By the time he arrived, the isolation felt deliberate. The facility itself was enormous, maybe twice the size of the main distribution center, all steel and concrete and loading docks that seemed to go on forever. A chain-link fence topped with razor wire surrounded the property. Security cameras tracked his car as he pulled up to the gate. A guard emerged from the booth, clipboard in hand. "Help you?" "Evan Cole, Assistant Operations Manager. I'm here for the inspection." The guard checked his list, frowned, then nodded slowly. "They're expecting you. Park and visitor lot, check in at the main office." The gate rolled open with a metallic groan. Inside, the facility hummed with activity. Forklifts moved between towering shelves. Workers shouted instructions over the noise of machinery. Conveyor belts carried boxes in endless streams. Everything looked normal, efficient, professional. But something felt wrong. Evan couldn't name it yet, just a prickling sense that the performance was too smooth, too practiced. He found the main office on the second floor. A receptionist looked up as he entered, her smile professional but not warm. "Mr. Cole, Mr. Castellano is waiting for you." She led him down a hallway to a corner office where a man in his late 50s sat behind a desk cluttered with paperwork and coffee cups. Vincent Castellano had the look of someone who'd spent decades in warehouses, broad shoulders, weathered face, eyes that had seen every trick and shortcut in the book. "Cole." Castellano stood and shook his hand with a grip designed to test strength. "Madeline called me about your visit. Safety inspection, right?" "Standard review. Nothing to worry about if everything's in order." "Everything's always in order here." Castellano's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We run a tight ship. Best safety record in the network, 18 months running. 0 incidents, 0 violations. We're proud of that." "I saw the reports. Very impressive." "Not impressive. Just professional." Castellano gestured to the window overlooking the warehouse floor. "I've been running facilities for 30 years. You learn what matters. Safety matters." They talked for another 20 minutes about operations, procedures, staffing levels. Castellano answered every question smoothly, pulled up documentation instantly, showed Evan charts and graphs that told a story of perfect compliance. Everything was too perfect. "I'd like to walk the floor," Evan said finally. "Get a feel for operations firsthand." "Of course. I'll assign someone to give you a tour." "Actually, I'd prefer to go alone. No offense, but people act differently when management's watching." Castellano's expression hardened fractionally. "Company policy requires escorts for liability reasons. Insurance, you understand? I'll sign a waiver." "That's not how it works here." The words were friendly, but the tone wasn't. "Look, Cole, I don't know what Madeline told you, but there's nothing to find here. We run clean. If she's got concerns, she should bring them to me directly instead of sending someone to dig around." Evan met his gaze evenly. "I'm not here to dig. I'm here to verify. That's my job." "Then let me help you do your job. My operations manager, Dennis Harper, will show you around. He knows every inch of this place." There was no point in arguing. "Fine. When can we start?" "Right now." Dennis Harper turned out to be a lean man in his 40s with nervous energy and a habit of talking too fast. He appeared within minutes of Castellano's call, wearing a polo shirt and a forced smile. "Mr. Cole, pleasure to meet you. Heard a lot about your work at the main facility. That situation with North Point was impressive." Word travels fast. "We're all one company. Your success is our success. Dennis gestured toward the door. Ready for the grand tour? They descended to the warehouse floor, and Dennis launched into what was clearly a rehearsed presentation. He pointed out safety features, explained protocols, highlighted recent improvements. Everything he showed Evan matched the documentation perfectly. Too perfectly. Evan listened with half his attention while watching the workers. They moved efficiently, followed procedures, wore their safety equipment properly. But there was something in their body language, a tension, a wariness, that suggested they knew they were being observed. How long have you been operations manager here? Evan asked. 8 years. Started as a shift supervisor, worked my way up. This facility's like family to me. And in those 8 years, you've never had a single safety incident? Dennis's smile faltered. Well, minor things, bumps and bruises, nothing reportable. According to the records, there's been nothing at all for 18 months. We're very careful. They walked through receiving, through storage, through shipping. Dennis maintained his cheerful commentary, but Evan noticed small things. A fire extinguisher mounted too high to reach easily, an emergency exit partially blocked by pallets, a forklift with a cracked mirror that should have been replaced. Minor violations, individually meaningless, but they suggested the perfect safety record was cosmetic. They were passing through a corridor between storage sections when Evan heard it, a loud crash followed by shouting. Dennis stiffened. Probably just a dropped pallet. Happens all the time. Let's check it out. That's not part of the tour. Evan was already walking toward the sound. He found a small crowd gathered around a young worker sitting on the ground, his face pale, holding his left arm at an odd angle. A forklift sat nearby, its load scattered across the floor. What happened? Evan asked. The workers looked at him, then at Dennis, who'd caught up. The injured man started to speak, but Dennis cut him off. Just an accident. Miguel lost his balance climbing down from the forklift. We'll get him to the medical office, file an incident report. Lost his balance? Evan looked at the scattered load. Or did something fall? Miguel met Evan's eyes, and something passed between them, a silent plea, or maybe a warning. I slipped, Miguel said quietly. My fault. Let's get you checked out. Dennis helped Miguel to his feet with careful hands, his expression concerned but somehow practiced. Cole, if you'll excuse us, I need to handle this. Company protocol. I'll come with you. That's not necessary. I'm here for a safety inspection. This is a safety incident. I need to observe how it's handled. Dennis's jaw tightened, but he nodded. They took Miguel to a small medical office where a tired-looking nurse examined his arm and declared it probably sprained, not broken. She wrapped it, gave him ice, and told him to see a doctor if the pain didn't improve. The whole time, Dennis stood nearby with a clipboard, taking notes, asking Miguel questions about exactly what happened. Miguel stuck to his story. He'd slipped, lost his balance. It was his own carelessness. But when Dennis stepped out to make a phone call, Miguel caught Evan's attention. You're from corporate? He whispered. Something like that. Then you should know. He glanced at the door. Things aren't what they look like here. What do you mean? I can't say more, but be careful. Ask too many questions and bad things happen. Before Evan could respond, Dennis returned and Miguel went silent. The rest of the tour was uneventful. Dennis showed Evan the remaining sections, pointed out safety features, maintained his professional demeanor. But the earlier ease was gone, replaced by something watchful. When they finished, Dennis walked Evan back to the administrative offices. I hope you got what you needed, Dennis said. Like I said, we run a clean operation. I'll need to review some documentation, incident reports from the past 2 years, maintenance logs, training records. Of course, I'll have everything sent to your hotel. Actually, I'd prefer to review them here, and I'll need access to the floor tomorrow without an escort. Company policy allows for unannounced spot checks. Dennis's smile was tight. I'll need to clear that with Mr. Castellano. You do that. Evan checked into a motel 10 miles from the facility, a sad little place with cigarette burns on the furniture and walls so thin he could hear his neighbors arguing. He ordered takeout and spread the documentation Dennis had provided across the bed. The records told the same story as before. Perfect compliance, 0 incidents, exemplary safety culture. But Evan had been doing this long enough to recognize the pattern. The reports were too consistent, too clean, too free of the small problems that plagued every warehouse operation. Someone was lying. His phone rang. Madeline. How's the inspection going? Something's wrong here. The numbers are too good. The people are too careful. It feels staged. Any evidence? Not yet, just instinct. Instinct isn't enough. I need proof before we can take action against Castellano. He's been with the company for 28 years, has powerful allies on the board. If you accuse him without evidence, he'll bury you. What do you suggest? Find someone willing to talk. There's always someone. Madeline paused. But be smart about it, Cole. Castellano's not stupid. He knows why you're really there. After she hung up, Evan sat in the depressing motel room and thought about Miguel's warning. Bad things happen. What did that mean? Were workers being threatened, fired for reporting incidents? He needed to talk to Miguel privately, away from the facility and Castellano's eyes. The next morning, Evan arrived early and waited in the parking lot. Workers streamed in for the morning shift, and he spotted Miguel among them, his arms still wrapped, moving carefully. Miguel, Evan called, approaching. Can I talk to you for a minute? Miguel looked around nervously. I'm going to be late for my shift. This won't take long. Yesterday you said things aren't what they look like. What did you mean? I shouldn't have said that. I was in pain, not thinking clearly. I'm not here to cause problems for you. I'm here because someone at corporate thinks this facility is hiding something. If that's true, if people are getting hurt and it's being covered up, I need to know. Miguel stared at him for a long moment, weighing something internal. Then he glanced around again and lowered his voice. There's a guy who used to work here, Roberto Silva. He got injured bad about a year ago, filed a complaint, and suddenly he was gone. Fired for performance issues, they said. But everyone knew it was because he talked. Where can I find him? There's a bar in town, Murphy's. He hangs out there most nights. But I'm telling you, he won't talk. Not after what they did to him. Let me worry about that. Thank you, Miguel. Don't use my name, please. I've got kids. The fear in his voice was real, and Evan felt something cold settle in his chest. What kind of operation inspired that level of fear? He spent the day conducting his official inspection, taking notes, photographing equipment, asking questions that Dennis and Castellano answered with practiced ease. But his mind was already on that evening, on finding Roberto Silva and learning what had really happened here. Murphy's turned out to be a dim, wood-paneled establishment that smelled of beer and fried food. A handful of locals occupied the bar, watching a baseball game on a television mounted in the corner. Evan scanned the room and spotted a man sitting alone in a booth, nursing a drink with the dedication of someone trying to forget something. Evan approached carefully. Roberto Silva? The man looked up with bloodshot eyes. He was maybe 40, with the worn look of someone who'd been broken down and hadn't quite rebuilt. Who's asking? My name's Evan Cole. I work for Cross Technologies. I wanted to ask you about your time at Facility 9. Roberto's expression hardened. I don't work there anymore. I know. That's why I'm here. I need to understand what happened. Why? So you can make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else? Or so you can figure out how to keep people like me quiet? Evan sat down across from him. I'm investigating safety violations at the facility. I think incidents are being covered up. If that's true, I need to expose it. You're wasting your time. Castellano owns that place. He decides what gets reported and what doesn't. Anyone who disagrees finds themselves unemployed. Tell me what happened to you. Roberto took a long drink, considering. Then he seemed to make a decision. I was running a forklift. One of the hydraulic lines had been leaking for weeks. I reported it 3 times through the proper channels. Nothing happened. They said it was scheduled for maintenance, but maintenance never came. He rotated his left shoulder, and Evan saw the stiffness there. The line burst while I was moving a 2-ton load, lost control, crashed into a support column, dislocated my shoulder, fractured 2 ribs, got a concussion. That should have been a major incident report. Should have been. But Castellano came to see me in the hospital, told me the accident was my fault for not double-checking the equipment before use. Said if I filed an official complaint, he'd make sure I was terminated for negligence. But if I kept quiet, took the workers' comp, and didn't cause trouble, He'd let me resign with severance. And you took the deal. I've got a wife and 2 kids. What else was I supposed to do? Roberto's voice was bitter. But here's the thing. I wasn't the first. There have been others, broken bones, chemical burns. One guy who lost 3 fingers in a conveyor belt. All of them covered up. All of them paid off or scared off. Evan felt anger building in his chest. Will you testify to this? Give an official statement? And lose my severance? End up blacklisted from every warehouse job in the state? Roberto shook his head. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. I've got too much to lose. People are still getting hurt there. If we don't stop this, then they'll learn what I learned, that corporate doesn't actually care about safety. They care about numbers that look good on paper. Roberto stood, dropping money on the table. You want to be a hero? Fine. But don't ask me to be your martyr. He left Evan sitting alone in the booth, the weight of the situation pressing down like a physical thing. The next morning, Evan requested a meeting with Castellano. They sat in his office, the warehouse visible through the windows behind him, and Evan laid out what he'd found. Not Roberto's testimony, he wouldn't betray that confidence, but the inconsistencies in the reports, the minor violations he'd observed, the fear he'd sensed in the workers. Castellano listened with an expression that never changed. Let me be clear about something, Cole, he said when Evan finished. I've been running warehouses since before you were born. I know how to keep workers safe. If there are minor issues, a blocked exit, a cracked mirror, those get fixed in routine maintenance. They don't constitute a pattern of negligence. What about unreported injuries? What injuries? Show me documentation, show me complaints, show me anything except hearsay and your gut feeling. Workers are afraid to come forward, or there's nothing to come forward about. Castellano leaned back in his chair. I think I know what this is really about. Madeline's testing you again, seeing if you'll manufacture a crisis to prove your worth. Well, here's some advice. Don't. There's no conspiracy here. Just a well-run facility that you're trying to tear down to make yourself look good. That's not what I'm doing. No? Then where's your evidence? Where are your witnesses? Where's anything except suspicion? Castellano's smile was cold. You've got nothing, Cole. And Madeline's going to be very disappointed when you report that Facility 9 is exactly what it appears to be. Perfect. The meeting ended, and Evan walked back to his car feeling the walls closing in. Castellano was right about one thing. He had no hard evidence. Just a former employee who wouldn't testify, a current employee too scared to speak, and his own instincts. But those instincts were screaming. He called Madeline from the parking lot. I need more time. There's something here, but everyone's too afraid to talk. You have 2 days, Cole. The inspection ends Friday. If you don't have evidence by then, I have to accept Castellano's reports as accurate. 2 days isn't enough. It's what you've got. Make it work. She hung up. Evan sat in his car staring at the facility and felt the familiar pressure building. This was another test. Another impossible situation designed to see if he'd compromise or quit or find some third option that didn't exist. Then he thought about something Madeline had said weeks ago. The hard thing and the right thing are usually the same thing. What was the right thing here? Exposing Castellano required evidence. Evidence required witnesses. Witnesses required protection he couldn't offer. It was a circle with no exit, unless he created one. That afternoon, Evan requested access to the facility's security camera footage for the past year. Dennis, looking uncomfortable, said he'd need Castellano's approval. Then get it. An hour later, he received an email, access denied. The footage was proprietary and contained trade secrets. Only facility management could authorize its release, and Castellano had declined. Evan wasn't surprised, but he'd expected the refusal, counted on it. He spent the evening reviewing every document he'd been given, looking for patterns, for gaps, for anything that didn't align, and he found it in the maintenance logs. Minor repairs that should have been completed weren't. Equipment that should have been replaced was still in service. The logs showed perfect compliance, but the dates didn't match up with the work orders. Someone had been backdating records. It wasn't proof of injuries being covered up, but it was proof of falsification. And if they were lying about maintenance, what else were they lying about? The next morning, Evan showed up at the facility with a corporate safety inspector he'd requested from headquarters, a no-nonsense woman named Karen Wright, who'd been conducting facility inspections for 15 years. Castellano met them in the lobby, his expression thunderous. "This is highly irregular. You didn't have authorization." "Ms. Cross authorized it," Evan said calmly. "Ms. Wright is here to conduct an independent assessment of your maintenance compliance. I've identified discrepancies that require immediate investigation." Karen pulled out her tablet. "Mr. Castellano, I'll need access to all equipment, all maintenance logs, and interviews with your maintenance staff. This is a mandatory inspection under corporate safety protocol. You can cooperate or I can shut down operations until you do." Castellano's jaw worked, but he nodded stiffly. The inspection took all day. Karen was thorough, methodical, and immune to Castellano's charm or intimidation. She found the backdated records within 2 hours. She found equipment that should have been decommissioned still in use. She found maintenance work marked complete that had never been done. By 4 p.m., she had enough. "Mr. Castellano," she said, her voice cold with professional anger, "this facility is in violation of 17 separate safety protocols. I'm recommending immediate suspension of operations pending a full investigation." Castellano's face went white. "You can't do that. We have contracts, shipments. You should have thought of that before falsifying safety records." She turned to Evan. "Mr. Cole, I'll be filing my report directly with Miss Cross. I'd suggest you not be here when Mr. Castellano's employees realize they're out of work because of this." But Evan stayed. He watched Castellano's carefully constructed world collapse, watched the man make frantic phone calls to board members who couldn't or wouldn't help, watched the facility go silent as workers were sent home. And when Castellano finally sat behind his desk with his head in his hands, Evan spoke quietly. "This didn't have to happen. If you'd just been honest, if you'd prioritize people over numbers, don't." Castellano's voice was broken. "Don't stand there and lecture me about honesty. You don't know what it's like to run a facility this size with the targets they give us. Something always has to give. And you chose safety. I chose survival. For me, for this facility, for the workers who need these jobs." He looked up, his eyes red. "You think you're better than me? Wait until you've been doing this for 30 years. Wait until the board's breathing down your neck about quarterly numbers and threatening your job if you don't deliver. Then tell me how easy it is to choose the right thing." Evan felt something almost like pity. Almost. "The difference," he said, "is that when that choice comes, I'll make it anyway." He walked out of Facility 9 for the last time as the sun was setting. Behind him, the warehouse stood silent, shut down, its perfect safety record revealed as the lie it always was. His phone rang. Madeline. "I got Karen's report. Well done. Castellano's finished." "Yes. The board's already discussing his termination and potential legal action." She paused. "How do you feel?" Evan thought about Roberto Silva, about Miguel's fear, about all the workers who'd been hurt and silenced. "Like I should have moved faster." "You moved as fast as you could. And you did it the right way, with evidence, with process, with integrity intact." Her voice softened slightly. "That matters, Cole. It matters more than you know. What happens now?" "Now you come home. We'll discuss your next assignment. And Cole?" "Yes?" "You passed." The word should have brought relief. Instead, Evan just felt tired. He drove back to the city through the darkness, thinking about Castellano's words. Would he become that man someday? Someone so ground down by pressure that compromise seemed like the only option? He didn't know. But he knew that the tests weren't over. Madeline had said it herself. She was grooming him for something bigger. Each test had been harder than the last. Each choice more difficult. And eventually, he'd face a choice that would define everything. He just hoped that when it came, he'd still remember the man who'd left a note on a windshield in an empty parking lot. The man who chose right over easy, truth over convenience, character over survival. That man seemed very far away now. But Evan held on to him anyway, because letting go meant becoming someone he didn't want Marcus to know. 3 years passed like pages turning in a book Evan never expected to read. The weeks after Facility 9 became months of restructuring, of implementing new oversight protocols, of building systems designed to prevent another Castellano from gaming the numbers. Evan worked alongside Madeline, learning not just operations but strategy, not just management but leadership. His salary climbed to territory he'd once thought impossible. Marcus started middle school. They moved to a better neighborhood, a real house with a yard where his son could play. And the tests kept coming. Some were obvious, crisis situations where Evan had to choose between profit and principle, between protecting the company and protecting workers. Others were subtle, woven into daily operations so carefully he only recognized them in retrospect. Madeline watched everything, said little, and kept her own counsel about what she saw. But something was building. Evan could feel it in the air, in the way board members looked at him during meetings, in the increasing responsibility. Madeline delegated. The CFO she'd mentioned, Richard Vance, had begun positioning himself more aggressively, making public statements about the company's future, cultivating relationships with major shareholders. The succession battle was beginning, even if no one said it aloud. One Thursday in November, Madeline called Evan to her office. He found her standing at her windows as always, but something in her posture suggested weariness. "Close the door," she said without turning. He did, and waited. "The board met yesterday," she said finally. "They want me to announce a retirement timeline. 18 months. After that, they'll vote on my successor." And Vance is campaigning. Aggressively. He's promising the board increased profitability, streamlined operations, aggressive expansion into new markets. Everything they want to hear. "What are you promising?" "Nothing, because I'm not the one who will be leading this company." She turned to face him. "You are." The words hung between them, too large for the room. "Madeline, I'm recommending you to the board as my successor. It's time to make this official. No more tests, no more probation. Either they approve you or they don't." Evan felt something close to panic. "I've only been here 3 years. Vance has been with the company for 15. The board will do what's best for Cross Technologies, and you're what's best." She moved to her desk, pulled out a thick folder. "This contains everything you'll need: financial projections, strategic plans, my personal notes on every board member and how to work with them. You have 6 weeks to prepare your presentation. Then you'll stand in front of 12 people and convince them that a former grocery store worker should run a multi-billion-dollar company. Why not just tell them yourself? Because I'm biased. They know I've been grooming you, that I see something in you I don't see in Vance, but they also see the numbers. Vance has delivered consistent returns. You've delivered integrity and process improvements, which are harder to quantify on a balance sheet." She paused. "You need to show them that integrity isn't a luxury. It's what will keep this company alive when the next crisis comes." "And if I fail?" "Then Vance becomes CEO, and everything I built slowly transforms into something else. Something profitable, probably, but not something I'd be proud of." Her pale eyes found his. "This is the real test, Cole. Everything else was preparation. This moment, this choice, determines who you become." Evan took the folder with hands that wanted to shake. The weight of it felt like the weight of the future. That night, he sat at his kitchen table while Marcus did homework nearby and opened the folder. Inside were hundreds of pages. Financial statements, market analyses, competitive assessments, notes in Madeline's precise handwriting about board dynamics and corporate politics. It was a masterclass in running Cross Technologies, distilled into paper. "Dad?" Marcus looked up from his math problems. "You okay? You look stressed." Evan managed a smile. "Big presentation coming up. Career-defining stuff." "You'll do great. You always do." The confidence in his son's voice was absolute, unearned, beautiful. Marcus was 12 now, growing into someone Evan barely recognized, taller, more thoughtful, with Sarah's eyes and expressions that sometimes stopped Evan's heart. He'd become a kid who did his homework without being asked, who helped neighbors carry groceries, who stood up for other kids at school. "Marcus," Evan said slowly, "if I asked you what kind of person you want to be when you grow up, what would you say?" Marcus considered this with the seriousness he brought to important questions. "Someone who helps people. Someone who does the right thing even when it's hard." He paused. "Like you." "I'm not always sure I do the right thing." "But you try. That's what matters, right?" Out of the mouths of children, Evan thought. He reached across the table and ruffled his son's hair, earning a good-natured complaint. Yeah, buddy, that's what matters. The next 6 weeks consumed Evan completely. He worked 18-hour days studying every aspect of Cross Technology's operations, building financial models, developing strategic plans that balance growth with sustainability. He met with department heads, interviewed workers, visited facilities across the network. He wanted to understand not just the numbers, but the people, the human infrastructure that made everything work. And everywhere he went, he heard stories. Workers who'd benefited from the retention programs he'd helped implement, supervisors who'd adopted his safety-first approach, families whose lives had improved because Cross Technologies had chosen to invest in people rather than treat them as disposable. The changes hadn't been cheap. Short-term profits had taken a hit. But turnover was down, productivity was up, and the company's reputation had improved significantly. Major clients specifically cited Cross Technology's worker treatment as a reason for contract renewals. Evan compiled it all into a presentation that told a story. Integrity wasn't just morally correct, it was economically smart. Long-term stability required short-term investment in people. The companies that survived weren't the ones that squeezed every penny from their workers. They were the ones that built cultures worth preserving. 2 days before the board meeting, Vance invited Evan to lunch. They met at an expensive restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the menu had no prices and the wine list required a sommelier. Vance was in his 50s, handsome in a silver fox way, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Evan's first car. "Cole," Vance said warmly, shaking his hand, "I've been wanting to sit down with you. We're competitors, but we don't have to be enemies." They ordered, exchanged pleasantries, and then Vance got to his point. "You know the board's going to choose me," he said, not unkindly. "Nothing personal, you've done impressive work. But I have experience, relationships, a track record of increasing shareholder value. That's what boards care about." Madeline thinks differently. Madeline's brilliant, but she's also sentimental. She wants to believe that a company can be run on principles instead of profits. The real world doesn't work that way. Vance leaned back. "Here's what I'm offering. When I become CEO, I want you as my COO, Chief Operating Officer. You'd oversee all facilities, all logistics, everything you're already doing, but with more authority and a significant raise. You'd be my second in command. In exchange for what? Your endorsement. Tell the board you think I'm the right choice. Back me publicly. That would go a long way toward making this transition smooth." Evan studied the man across from him. Vance wasn't cruel or stupid. He was pragmatic, calculating, the kind of executive who'd run 100 successful companies. Under his leadership, Cross Technologies would probably thrive financially. But Evan thought about Roberto Silva in that bar, about Miguel's fear, about Castellano's justifications, about all the small compromises that seemed reasonable until you looked back and didn't recognize yourself. "I appreciate the offer," Evan said carefully, "but I'm going to present my own vision to the board and let them decide." Vance's expression hardened slightly. "You're making a mistake. Even if by some miracle they choose you, you'll have made an enemy of the person who'll probably end up as your boss anyway." "Maybe, but I'd rather lose with integrity than win with compromise." "That's exactly the kind of naive idealism that'll get you crushed in this business." Vance signaled for the check. "When you change your mind, and you will, the offer stands, for now." They parted without warmth, and Evan spent the drive back to the office wondering if Vance was right. Was integrity really viable at the highest levels of business, or was it a luxury afforded only to people who didn't have to make the hard choices? The question haunted him right up until the morning of the board meeting. He arrived early, wearing the best suit he owned, still not as expensive as Vance's, but respectable. Madeline met him outside the conference room, her expression unreadable. "Ready?" she asked. "No, but I'm going in anyway." "Good answer." She placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. "Whatever happens, I want you to know. You've already exceeded every expectation I had. You've become exactly who I hoped you'd be. Even if the board doesn't choose me, especially then, because it'll mean you chose principle over advancement. Not many people would." The boardroom was intimidating. A massive table surrounded by leather chairs, walls lined with portraits of previous company leaders. windows overlooking the city from the 20th floor. 12 board members filed in, taking their seats. Vance sat at one end, confident and relaxed. Evan sat at the other, trying not to let his nerves show. The chairman, an elderly man named Harrison who'd been on the board for 30 years, called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss succession planning for the CEO position. Ms. Cross has indicated her intention to retire in 18 months. She's recommended Evan Cole as her successor. We've also received interest from Richard Vance, our current CFO. Both candidates will present their visions for the company's future. Mr. Vance, you'll go first. Vance's presentation was masterful. He outlined aggressive growth strategies, international expansion opportunities, technological investments that would reduce labor costs by 20%. He showed financial projections that had revenue doubling in 5 years. He spoke confidently about shareholder value, market share, competitive positioning. The board members nodded along, asked engaged questions, looked impressed. When he finished, Harrison turned to Evan. Mr. Cole, your turn. Evan stood and walked to the front of the room. He'd prepared slides, had data ready. But looking at the faces around the table, wealthy, powerful people who'd spent decades in boardrooms like this, he made a decision. He closed his laptop. 3.5 years ago, he began, I scratched Madeline's car in a parking lot. I could have driven away. No one would have known, but I left a note because I wanted to be able to look my son in the eye and tell him I'd done the right thing. He had their attention. Madeline used that moment to test me. She's been testing me ever since. Impossible deadlines, ethical dilemmas, situations designed to see if I'd compromise when pressured. And I won't lie to you, I've wanted to compromise. There have been moments when cutting corners or bending rules would have been so much easier. He paused, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. But here's what I learned. The companies that survive aren't the ones that maximize short-term profits at any cost. They're the ones that build sustainable cultures, that invest in people, that make decisions based on decades rather than quarters. Mr. Vance showed you impressive numbers, but those numbers come from treating workers as expenses to minimize rather than assets to develop. One of the board members, a woman named Patricia Chen, leaned forward. You're saying his approach is wrong? I'm saying it's incomplete. Yes, we need to be profitable. Yes, we need to compete. But we also need to be the kind of company people want to work for, that clients want to partner with, that communities welcome rather than resent. He opened his laptop and brought up his own data. The retention improvements, the productivity gains, the client feedback about Cross Technology's reputation. Then he showed the costs, the reduced short-term margins, the investments in wages and benefits, the slower growth trajectory. Mr. Vance can double revenue in 5 years, Evan said. But at what cost? How many workers injured because we cut safety to save money? How many shortcuts taken because quarterly targets matter more than long-term sustainability? How many Castellanos will we create by pushing people beyond their breaking point? Vance stood abruptly. That's a gross mischaracterization of my approach. Is it? Your expansion plan calls for reducing our labor costs by 20%. That means layoffs, or wage cuts, or both. Your efficiency improvements mean pushing fewer workers to do more with less. Your growth targets require the exact kind of pressure that led to Facility 9. The room went silent. Harrison cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, you make compelling points about sustainability, but the board has a fiduciary duty to shareholders. We can't prioritize worker welfare over returns. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to recognize that they're connected. The facilities with the best worker treatment have the best productivity. The programs that cost us money up front have saved us more in reduced turnover, fewer errors, and better client relationships. Doing right by people isn't charity, it's good business. He brought up his final slide, a photograph of the note he'd left on Madeline's windshield, enlarged and framed. This note hangs in Madeline's office, Evan said quietly. It represents a choice, the choice to do the right thing when no one's watching. That's what leadership should be. Not maximizing profits at any cost, but building something that lasts, something we can be proud of. He closed the laptop and returned to his seat. The silence that followed felt like judgment. Harrison looked around the table. Questions for either candidate? The questions came for an hour, some hostile, some curious, all probing. Evan answered honestly, admitting where he lacked experience, acknowledging the risks in his approach. Vance answered smoothly, pivoting weaknesses into strengths, making everything sound not just possible, but inevitable. Finally, Harrison called for a vote. All those in favor of Richard Vance as Madeline's successor? 6 hands rose. Half the board. Evan felt his stomach drop. All those in favor of Evan Cole? 5 hands rose. Patricia Chen, 2 others, Madeline, and Harrison himself. A tie. Harrison frowned. We have 1 abstention. Margaret, you didn't vote. Margaret Foster, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who'd been silent throughout, leaned back in her chair. Because I'm not convinced either approach is complete. Mr. Vance, your numbers are impressive, but they rely on assumptions about worker productivity that concern me. Mr. Cole, your principles are admirable, but I need to know you can make hard decisions when necessary. She looked at Evan directly. Tell me about a time you had to choose between doing what was right and doing what was profitable. And be honest, did you ever choose profit? Evan thought about the past 3 years, about all the tests, all the pressure, all the moments when compromise had beckoned. Yes, he said, once. The admission rippled through the room. We had a client threatening to terminate a $10 million contract if we didn't meet an impossible deadline. The only way to do it was to run our workers 12-hour shifts for 2 weeks straight, bypassing the safety protocols I'd implemented. I approved it. And what happened? Margaret asked. We met the deadline, kept the client. No one got hurt. We were lucky. But afterward, I couldn't sleep. Because I'd compromised the one thing I'd built my reputation on. I'd chosen profit over principle, and it ate at me until I went back to that client and told them the truth. Which was? That if they ever asked us to compromise safety again, we'd walk away from the contract. That some money isn't worth making. Evan's voice was steady. They respected that. In fact, they increased their contract because they said most companies would have just kept lying. They wanted to work with someone who'd tell them the truth, even when it cost something. Margaret considered this for a long moment. Then she raised her hand. I vote for Evan Cole. The room erupted in murmurs. Harrison gavelled for quiet. By a vote of 6-6 with 1 deciding vote, Evan Cole will succeed Madeline Cross as CEO of Cross Technologies, effective 18 months from today. Evan couldn't breathe, couldn't process what had just happened. He looked at Madeline and saw something rare on her face, a genuine smile. Vance stood stiffly. The board has spoken. Congratulations, Cole. He left without shaking hands, and Evan knew he'd just made a powerful enemy. But sitting in that boardroom, surrounded by people who'd just bet the company's future on his integrity, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The next 18 months were a controlled hurricane. Evan worked alongside Madeline, learning everything she could teach him while proving to a skeptical board that their gamble would pay off. He implemented changes carefully, balanced growth with sustainability, made hard decisions that kept him awake at night but that he could defend in the mirror each morning. Marcus watched his father navigate the pressure and ask questions that cut to the heart of things. Are you happy, Dad? Like, really happy? Evan considered the question seriously. I'm challenged. I'm scared most days, but yeah, I think I'm happy because I'm doing work that matters. Is the money worth it? The money helps, but that's not why I do it. Then why? Evan thought about the note on the windshield, about the choice that had changed everything. Because someone gave me a chance to prove that doing the right thing isn't naive, that integrity can survive at the highest levels, and I don't want to waste that chance. Marcus nodded slowly, processing. I'm proud of you, Dad. Those 4 words meant more than any board vote ever could. When the transition day finally arrived, Madeline held a company-wide meeting. Thousands of employees gathered in person and virtually to hear her final speech as CEO. 30 years ago, she began, I started this company with a simple idea, that logistics could be both efficient and ethical, that we could move goods across the world while treating the people who made it possible with dignity and respect. She paused, looking out at the assembled faces. I won't lie to you, it's been harder than it should be. There have been times when choosing principles over profits cost us contracts, cost us money, cost us opportunities. But those choices also built something more valuable than market share. They built trust. She gestured to Evan, who stood beside her on the stage. 3 years ago, I met a man who scratched my car and left a note. A small moment, a choice that should have meant nothing, but it told me everything I needed to know about who he was, and every test I've put him through since has confirmed that initial judgment. Madeline turned to face him directly. Evan Cole will be CEO because he understands that a company is only as good as the choices it makes when no one's watching. Because he's proven that integrity isn't weakness, it's strength. Because he'll protect what we've built while taking it further than I ever could. She extended her hand. Evan shook it, and the room erupted in applause. Afterward, in her office for the last time, Madeline handed him a small frame. Inside was the note he'd written on that crumpled receipt 3.5 years ago. "This is yours now," she said. "Put it somewhere you'll see it every day, because there will be days when the pressure feels unbearable, when compromise seems reasonable, when you'll wonder if holding on to integrity is worth the cost. And then? And then you'll look at this note and remember the man you were in that parking lot, the man who chose right over easy. That's the man this company needs. That's the man your son needs." Her pale eyes held his. "Don't lose him, Cole, no matter what." "I won't. I believe you." She smiled. "Now get out of my office. It's yours now." Evan hung the framed note in his new office, the CEO's office, still surreal to think about, right where he could see it from his desk. And over the months that followed, Madeline's warning proved prophetic. The pressure was immense. Clients demanded impossible things. The board questioned his decisions. Competitors undercut them on price by treating workers poorly. There were days when Evan wanted to scream, days when cutting corners beckoned like a siren song. But every time he looked at that note, he remembered who he'd been, who he'd chosen to be. And he held the line. Cross Technologies didn't grow as explosively as it might have under Vance, but it grew steadily, sustainably, building a reputation that attracted both clients and talent. Workers started careers there instead of just taking jobs. Retention rates climbed. Industry publications wrote about their model. Other companies, grudgingly, slowly, started adopting similar approaches. 5 years into Evan's tenure as CEO, Forbes ran a profile. The headline read, "The Parking Lot CEO, How One Note Changed Everything." They got most of the story right, though they made it sound more dramatic than it had been. No one interviewed believed the parking lot story until they met Evan and heard him tell it. Then they understood. Because Evan Cole hadn't changed. He still drove a sensible car, still lived in the same house, still showed up at Marcus's school events, and helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. The salary was different, the responsibilities were different, but the man who'd left that note in the dark was still there. Marcus graduated high school near the top of his class, with scholarship offers to 3 universities. At dinner, celebrating his acceptance to MYT in his father's alma mater, he raised a glass. "To Dad," he said, "who taught me that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing." Evan felt his eyes sting. "You learned that on your own, buddy." "No, I learned it by watching you." Marcus grinned. "Every time you came home exhausted from work but still helped with my homework. Every time you told someone the truth, even when a lie would have been easier. Every time you chose us over the job, even when the job was demanding everything." Around the table, their small family, Evan, Marcus, and Mrs. Chen, who'd become far more than just a neighbor, raised their glasses in a toast to choices and character and the long, difficult path of integrity. A decade after that note on the windshield, Evan stood before another board meeting. Cross Technologies had weathered an economic downturn, expanded into new markets, and maintained its reputation as an employer of choice. The company was thriving, but more importantly, it was thriving the right way. During the meeting, one of the newer board members, someone who hadn't been there for Evan's initial appointment, asked a pointed question. "Mr. Cole, your approach has worked well in stable markets, but what happens when we face a real crisis? When we have to choose between survival and your principles?" Evan thought about Facility 9, about the North Point crisis, about every impossible choice he'd faced. Then he looked around the table at faces that had become familiar over the years. "In my experience," he said carefully, "those aren't separate choices. Survival depends on principles. The moment we compromise who we are to save the company, we lose the company anyway, just more slowly." That's idealistic. Maybe, But it's kept us alive this long. Evan paused. I'm not saying we'll never have to make hard choices, but I am saying we'll make them honestly, transparently, with our values intact, because the alternative isn't survival, it's slow death by 1,000 compromises. The board member nodded thoughtfully, and the meeting moved on. That evening, Evan found himself standing in his office, looking at the framed note on the wall. The paper had yellowed slightly, the ink fading, but the words were still clear. Someone knocked. He turned to find Madeline in the doorway. She was 70 now, long retired, but she still stopped by occasionally to check on things. "Thought I'd find you here," she said. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About whether that note was really worth everything that came after. The tests, the pressure, the impossible choices." Madeline walked to the window, looking out over the city the way she always had. "Do you know why I really tested you the way I did?" "To see if I'd break." "No, to show you that you wouldn't." She turned to face him. "You were broken when I met you, Cole. Ground down by life, surviving on fumes, convinced the world didn't care about character. I needed to prove to you that it did, that choosing integrity over convenience wasn't just noble. It was necessary." "And did you?" "You tell me. When you look at your son, when you look at this company, when you look in the mirror, what do you see?" Evan thought about Marcus at MIT, studying engineering and talking about building systems that helped people, about Cross Technology's reputation, about the thousands of workers whose lives were better because of choices he'd made, about the man staring back at him each morning, tired but unashamed. "I see someone who left a note in a parking lot," he said quietly, "and never stopped being that person." Madeline smiled. "Then it was worth it. Every test, every impossible choice, every sleepless night, worth it, because you proved something I'd been looking for my whole career." "What's that?" "That integrity isn't just for the small moments. It scales. It survives pressure. It can change not just one life, but thousands." She walked to the door, then paused. "Keep that note on your wall, Cole. Keep showing people that character matters more than convenience, because that's the real legacy. Not what we build, but how we build it." After she left, Evan sat alone in the CEO's office of a company that employed 15,000 people and generated billions in annual revenue. The journey from that parking lot seemed impossible. The distance between who he'd been and who he'd become almost incomprehensible. But the thread was clear. One choice, made in darkness when no one was watching. A choice to own a mistake rather than hide from it, to do right rather than easy. That choice had changed everything. His phone buzzed. Marcus, sending a photo of himself on MIT's campus with a caption that made Evan's chest ache with pride. "Following in your footsteps, Dad. Except I won't scratch any cars." Evan laughed and sent back, "Smart kid. Love you, buddy." He stood and walked to the framed note one more time, reading his own handwriting from a lifetime ago. The words were simple. The impact had been profound. And somewhere in the city below, in parking lots and warehouses and offices, other people were facing their own small choices in the dark. Decisions that seemed meaningless but might change everything. Moments when character would be tested and futures would be written. Evan hoped they'd choose well. He hoped they'd understand that lives weren't changed by grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but by ordinary people choosing right over easy, truth over convenience, integrity over comfort. One note at a time. One choice at a time. One honest moment that might mean nothing, or might mean everything. The framed paper caught the light from his desk lamp, and Evan smiled. Then he turned off the lights, locked his office, and went home to the life he'd built. Not with wealth or power or status, but with character that had held steady when everything else was falling apart. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.